us with its wonderful cultural practices. You know that we use the metal gong, called variously in different places, and when there are great moments, you know, the agogo goes, boo, 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 and then the town crier makes the announcement. This is some kind of town crier event, but it's a very positive one in the sense that we are celebrating one of us, and we're happy to be able to do this with the collaborative efforts of various people, and I think the vote of thanks will be done at the appropriate time. But I'd like to ensure that you have the programs there by the corner. I'll ask some of our assistants to bring them in case you have not got one. Don't worry, you don't have to leave your room at this point. We'll have them circulated so you can get. But if you have a program, I'd like to quickly refer you to page 23. Because there are people who have, and the institutions and organizations and departments that have supported us. I'm not going to call out their names, but I wanted to recognize them in spirit, you know, for sponsoring this event. So on page 23, you will see them, and I think it's quite a rich array of stakeholders. I thought I'd do that. At this point, we're just going to officially start. Almost as it should be, we have already seated Dr. Chris Brown, who has been one of the moving spirits behind this event. We welcome Dr. Chris Brown, a very staunch personality in the evolution of the Institute of African Studies and in the study of Africa at Carleton University and in Canada. Dr. Chris Brown, if you just wave your hand, we'll recognize you. Yes. Yes, the nation is committed. That's the spirit. You know, when I mentioned Africa, we knew that, you know, there'll be surprises that invoke our culture also in the room here. So please free to express yourself in the ways that you're most familiar with and comfortable with. And while I'm just filling up this side of the table, my name is Nduka Otiono. I'm the faculty at the Institute of African Studies. I'll quickly say that for the panelists this morning, you feel very free either to speak from the podium or seated, but I would prefer that if you came up here, because I think it does encourage you to be a bit more dramatic. So I'd like to invite the president of Carleton University, Professor Alastair Somali. Please a round of applause for him. I think he wears more than one cap today, not just as president of Carleton, but it's a great stakeholder in the study of Africa. Welcome, please.
Yes. Yes. Or sit up.
Yes.
He's making you sit up front. You can't sit in the audience.
So it's been a good way to bring him very close to the podium, you know, so that he'll be very close to the activity. We have a very long day, and a few people who have known how I typically will moderate events like this will know that time is critical, and I would just apologize ahead of time if I appear a bit too nudgy in order to keep us to time. It's a long day and it's a 2-day event, so we'll make it very business-like. I hope that we're going to be able to catch up with time. So if you go to page 1 of the program, by now we have done registration and coffee. We want to draw your attention to the conference guest Wi-Fi, wireless network CU wireless, and then username IA conference, password Southern Africa. In a bit, we'll also put up our Twitter handle, and I hope that you can also tweet depending on how you want to participate in the conversation today. I would like to invite at this point the director of the Institute of African Studies, who has been playing a very strong role in advancing the vision of the Institute, Dr. Pius Adesomi. He's going to give us a welcome address.
Happy birthday.
Oh, thank you. It was yesterday, right? Not it's in the spirit. Thank you, Nduka. I think by telling our guests that you tend to be a little nudgy in your timekeeping, you were using a euphemism for the terroristic timekeeper that you are known to be. So I'll try to keep things within my allotted 10 minutes. If I can get this thing to my quickly enough.
That's what happens when you're too tall.
It's the one at the top.
I have to get it to my... Yeah, it's voila. Thank you. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, it's okay. This height thing can be an advantage and sometimes a disadvantage. So on behalf of the Institute of African Studies, that is to say the only academic, the only standalone independent Africanist academic unit of this kind in the whole of Canada, I wish to welcome you all to the 2018 edition of our annual conference. Now, usually, as the tradition goes, I would spend my time in this welcome speech telling you, about our wonderful institute and the things we do, the nature of the conference, and do some housekeeping. I usually leave prefatory comments about the theme to the panelists and the speakers and all that. But this time I am going to break with tradition. I'm going to spend my time talking a little bit, speaking to the theme of our conference this year. And I'm going to zoom in on one particular word that has caught my attention as all the back and forth, the emailing, the conversations with the wonderful crop of colleagues who participated in the brainstorming, from Europe, Canada, South Africa, solidarity. And there's going to be a lot of talk about, and reminiscences about, the Canadian solidarity movement, or solidarity frameworks and circuits in terms of their imbrication with the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa and the broader context of Southern African struggles. And so thinking about these, it got me focused on one particular aspect of the Canadian story. And I'm going to tell you this story and then round up by, letting you know how thankful I am that the work and the life of my colleague, Professor Linda Freeman, has provided, the framework for us to gather together today to think through the issue of solidarity. So 2 years ago, I was invited by colleagues at the University of Ottawa to discuss a documentary movie that had just been released. Two of my IAS colleagues were there with me, Blair was there, and Nduka was there. And this movie focused on a very particular time period in Nigeria's post-colonial history. It was the history of a recent struggle for freedom from military dictatorship, the Abacha years, with particular focus on the pro-democracy struggle in Nigeria. And as I sat through 2 hours of this documentary, I saw all kinds of American characters, American narrators, American State Department officials, American this, American that, and they are framing this story of a very traumatic story in recent history in terms of American solidarities with the Nigerian pro-democracy movement. And I'm wincing and gnashing my teeth and whining in the audience. And when I got a chance to speak, I asked the Canadians present in the audience, how many of you are really aware of this country's role, Canada's role in the global solidarity movement with the Nigerian struggle against Abacha? How many of you are really aware that the Americans framing this story in these, and the documentary was going everywhere, all the usual festivals, MKO, Abiola and all that, and not a single Canadian voice, not a single Canadian narrator, it's all American statesmen, and it became an American story. And I drew a blank from the audience because there are stories of solidarity in global movements by this country. I told you, I said, one thing that this country inherited from the British that I don't seem to like very much is that self-effacing sense of modesty, which allows her to go everywhere and do this kind of stuff. And the Americans are always too happy to move in and reframe and reclaim the space and the story. So these stories are not properly told. That as far as international solidarity and agency, as far as they go in terms of the Nigerian struggle, it was the Canadians that we saw. They were at the forefront of it in terms of their collaboration with Wole Soyinka and all that. But when the time came to tell that story, many of the pro-democracy people were in exile here in Canada, in Toronto, in Ottawa, on the Canadian taxpayers' dime, but completely absent from that narrative. So when Blair and Chris and all the back and forth in the email about Canadian involvement in the anti-apartheid global solidarity movement, my generation in Nigeria was defined by that struggle. In Africa, we were defined by that struggle. So the narrative of that struggle, as far the way we saw it, was first and essentially a South African story. It's the struggle of the South Africans to free themselves from that particularly turbulent moment, difficult moment in there. And then when you extend that circle beyond South Africa, it became an African story. Some of us didn't think there was any way to be Africans, fully free Africans, until South Africa was free. And you move beyond that broader circuit of African solidarity, it became a global black internationalist story before becoming a truly world story. And in all of that, I was asking some of my friends, I said, it's amazing the Canadian stories that I'm hearing because of this conference. But as was the case said it's truly embarrassing that I'm hearing many of these stories for the first time. I hear all the other stories of the global solidarity movement, but I'm hearing these stories for the first time. And it is against that backdrop of the quietness of Canada's robust history of engagement and solidarities that I become very thankful for not only the fact that that happened in a moment in history, but because we have a framework and we have the people who could help us unleash, engage, navigate these stories in the next 2 days. And this is happening not just because we have this, but because the work of Professor Linda Freeman encapsulates that. So in that spirit, I know that my colleague Chris, it's his job to do the talking about Linda. But in that spirit, I also want you to join me in rising up and celebrating the colleague on whose account we have gathered here today. Thank you, Linda. So, welcome, and henceforth, feel free to tell these marvelous tell us Canadian stories, because I don't want to see another documentary with American State Department officials telling stories that this country needs to tell. Thank you.
So I'm going to try and find a moderate level that we can make a quick adjustment as the need arises. Thank you, Dr. Desomi, for those for the welcome remarks. If you look at the time, it's 5 minutes to 9 or somewhere around there. So we ought to have been rounding up this session. I know that the gentlemen here are very much aware of that, and I just thought I should reiterate that. So we can reclaim our time. It's not your fault that we're running a bit behind schedule, but we'll have to reclaim that. So in the order, I would invite our president, and then I'll leave the later part of the last part of this opening ceremony, this opening part of it, to Dr. Chris Brown, who would be the appropriate segue into the panels and the discussions. So may I invite our President of Carleton, Dr. Alester Somali, for his welcome address. Please give him an appropriate round of applause.
Thank you, Aduka, and welcome everybody to Carleton. I hope you appreciate that we have laid on the best of weather to be able to celebrate today, and I think we couldn't be in a better position in terms of having beautiful views outside. I want to also acknowledge the tremendous influence and impact that Linda has had, and not only looking back, but I think it's really important that we take this as a moment to think about the very important position that Canada must have on the world stage today in terms of being able to promote appropriate, positive and inclusive values across the world at a time that is seriously, the world is challenged in so many different ways. And so I think what I hope today will bring is a case of you looking back and reflecting, looking back and thinking about the things that have made a significant impact, and then think about how do we translate that as a group of people to make further positive change in this world, because we have a lot to do. Unlike many of you, my connections with Africa are somewhat brief, having spent most of my time either in Botswana or in Kenya. But I can't help but tell a story of the very first time I traveled to Africa. I sat next to a pilot on the plane, and he asked me where I was going, and when I explained where I was going and what I was going to do, he said, "Oh, I feel very sorry for you." And I looked surprised, and he said, "Because once the dust of Africa settles on you, you can never wash it off." And it is something that is absolutely true for me, and I'm sure is true for all of you, that the moment that dust has touched you, it changes your life, and it compels you to be engaged in what has happened and is happening across the whole of the continent. And that is what makes this special. And I have no doubt that the next time you look at a documentary, that we will be telling stories of what Canada and Canadians have done, because it is a very important story to tell. I hope you enjoy the activities today. I hope you share and learn a lot from each other, and I will look forward to joining you at the end of the day when we're on Parliament Hill, when we can once again take time and stop to celebrate what Canada and Canadians have been able to do. Welcome to Carleton. Have a fantastic day today, and I wish you all the best. Thanks.
As many of you know, and Chinua Achebe has famously translated proverbs are the pan kernel with which words are eaten in Africa. The president has developed one that the English will call metaphor, but I think for today we'll claim it as a new proverb, especially when it's in its reverse form. So in the next 2 days, we'll be sprinkling a whole lot of that dust on you and hoping that it's just going to stick with you. And then this is one important occasion that will also have those memories playing out in different ways, especially with the Festschrift that will be coming out of this. So it's going to be more concretized in ways, that it will remain with us for much longer than this occasion. On that note, I would like to invite Dr. Chris Brown to take us further and lead us into the next panel. So let me quickly say that you look at the program, and then I'm priming people who are going to, the panelists for the next session, to get ready, so that the transition will be very smooth, unlike the transition in some of our countries.
Thank you, Nduka. It was actually 40 years ago I arrived in Botswana, and I was greeted by Viviana Seaborn in exactly the same way she just greeted me this morning, so there's a nice continuity there. And it's actually very nice to look out and see so many friends from over the years. I think if we didn't have another excuse that Linda's retirement has offered us to gather together, I'm sure we would have found one. Linda joined the Department of Political Science here at Carleton in 1980. I arrived 6 years later in 1986. That means that Linda and I have been colleagues in the Department of Political Science, and since it was created in 2009, the Institute of African Studies, for 32 years now. Apparently, that record of longevity means that I'm the person in the department and associated with the Institute that has known Linda the longest, and therefore I get to be the one who stands in front of you to try to celebrate Linda's career. And it's a great honor and privilege to be able to do that. Before I do, though, just one caveat. I look around the room here and I realize that there are many people in this room who probably have known Linda longer than I have, and certainly in different contexts have known her better. And so I'm very aware that my words will probably be rather insufficient in terms of celebrating Linda's career. So I hope that what I can do right now in the few minutes I have is to maybe introduce the topic of celebrating Linda and her contributions. I hope that all the rest of you, when it's your turn at the mic, whatever topic you're speaking to, you'll preface your remarks by also sharing with us one or two words about Linda. So I hope that in that way, after 2 days, maybe my small beginning here in terms of celebrating Linda, by the end of the 2 days, all of you will contribute it and we'll have a fuller picture. This is a Festschrift in honor of Linda's career. Linda retired last year. And the organizing committee, we've come up with this rather ponderous title, Solidarity and Shifting Patterns of Hegemony in Southern Africa, Historical and Contemporary Perspectives. So I think many of you probably know, this was originally actually 2 different conferences. There were 2 different groups of people who both independently had the idea that wouldn't it be a good thing to do a conference related to Southern Africa at the moment of Linda's retirement to celebrate. One group of people was here at Carleton, led especially by Blair Rutherford. Where are you, Blair? And of course by our director, Pius. And the Carleton group thought it would be good to do something around the contemporary political dynamic in Southern Africa today. There was a second group of people, led by David Black and Susan Basili and others, who thought it would be a good idea to do something around the Canadian solidarity tradition in the anti-apartheid movement. And I think it's a very fortuitous thing that the two groups managed to come together, and through a lot of hard work and a lot of effort on everybody's part, we were able to join together and create this 2-day conference. Because I think in many ways, the 2 days of this conference capture the two poles of Linda's academic career. And I want to speak briefly to each of those. The first day here, in many respects, is the solidarity. So for the rest of the day, we're going to have 4 panels, and it'll be a group of people who were involved, people who were there over the years in the various panels, sharing their reminiscence, I suppose, a little bit, but also their analysis of that Canadian solidarity tradition in the anti-apartheid movement. I came to this campus, as I said, in 1986. Back then, it was a very different place. By far and away, the largest student group on campus was the Carleton anti-apartheid group. It was far and away the most active group on campus, and there was a certain ferment, a certain activity that went on. The intellectual guru, the person who provided the academic inspiration for those student groups on campus, was Linda. She was the one who provided the academic analysis upon which all that activism rested. But it wasn't just on the Carleton campus. Linda had a national, I might even say international, reputation for her work in that movement. And back in those days, I'm sure you all remember, Linda used to publish an annual summary or review of the Canadian foreign policy towards South Africa, in particular Southern Africa more generally, in Southern African Review. And I know that all of us waited every year for Linda's summary of what had happened. We had been there, we'd been to the protests, we'd written the letters, we'd signed the petitions, we'd followed parliamentary action, and then we waited until Linda's analysis came out to tell us what it all meant and what had happened. And so Linda certainly occupied a central role in those times. Of course, those annual articles laid the foundation for what became Linda's 1997 book, The Ambiguous Champion, Canada and South Africa in the Trudeau and Mulroney Years. Many of us are academics. I think very few of us as academics, however, can say that we have written the definitive book on a particular topic. And I think that that is something Linda can claim. Linda's analysis of Canadian foreign policy towards South Africa during that period is the definitive book on that topic. And I think the book is very deserving of all the accolades it has received. It, at the time, received the Harold Innis Prize for the best social science book published in Canada. It received many other commendations. And it, excuse me, I'm recovering from pneumonia. So certainly that book and all her previous publications established Linda as perhaps Canada's leading academic analyst, and I defer to John and any others in the room when I say that, of the Canadian role in the anti-apartheid movement. And that's day 1 of our conference. Day 2 is the bit about shifting paradigms or shifting patterns of hegemony in Southern Africa. After publishing The Ambiguous Champion, Linda has turned her attention more towards regional relations in Southern Africa, and especially South Africa's foreign policy in the region, and in particular towards Zimbabwe. That will be the subject matter of day 2 at this conference. We'll have a number of academic panels with very distinguished colleagues presenting papers on a number of topics related to that theme. If all goes well, Blair, we'll see, and David are in the room, that may result even in a book along those lines. We'll see. Clearly, this has been Linda's focus and interest for the last 20 years or so. She's published several articles on this, but the book itself is still forthcoming. I don't know, Linda, precisely when it's forthcoming, but soon. And I'm quite confident in predicting that just as Linda's book on Canadian foreign policy towards Africa became the definitive treatment of that subject matter, that when her book on South African South Africa's policy in the region comes out